Hello and welcome to Theology Unleashed, the channel where Eastern theology meets Western skepticism. In this video, I interview Professor Edward Dutton, an anthropologist, professor, and researcher. In his work, he likes to focus on controversial topics because he feels this is where real discoveries can be made. He put out a video a few years ago about how most geniuses are amateurs in the field in which they display their genius. In this video, he made the point that people like Einstein and many other innovators in their field were not formally trained in that field. I wanted to do this video for a while and was struggling to find someone to do the topic with, and I managed to get in touch with him and he agreed. The topic is about when science becomes a religion, or science as a religion rather than science as what it is supposed to be in epistemology. By science as a religion, I mean that it has the epistemic structure of a religious organization in the negative sense of religious epistemology. By that I mean there being a church clergy which gives pronouncements on what we are to accept as the dogmas, as the truth, or facts as they call them in the scientific domain. This is precisely the opposite of what science is meant to be, an epistemology built around questioning and evidence. Of course, there are some cases where the relevant data and concepts are unintelligible to lay people. In such cases, it is fair to make appeals to authority where the consensus of experts or experts who are particularly trusted are given as authorities on a subject, and the rest of us have to choose whether or not to accept their authority but are incapable of assessing the arguments for ourselves. However, in most cases, lay people can assess the arguments when they are presented clearly and accurately by science communicators. If this were not the case, then we would have to wonder why so many people on both sides of nearly every scientific debate write books and produce other forms of media targeted at communicating these arguments and ideas to lay people. When debating this online, very rarely have I had someone defend the idea that these subjects are unintelligible to lay people. One topic of focus where the type of reasoning I'm pushing back on here has been particularly frustrating for me has been arguments for the theory of evolution, for common descent. Many times when debating people online, I've had people give arguments for evolution or against intelligent design, which in my mind, when I offered a defeat for, the person retreated to appeals to authority. And it's very frustrating when somebody gives you an argument which you take apart and their response is, but my church leader told me to believe it, so you should believe it too. Of course, that's not what they say, but that's what it sounds like to me. Now on to the video. Professor Edward Dutton does believe in the theory of evolution. We don't get into that in this video. We focus on science, epistemology, and when science becomes a religion. Edward, thanks for coming on.
How do you do? Hello, thank you for having me.
So perhaps we could start. You could just say a bit about yourself in case anyone hasn't seen your work before.
Yeah, okay. So I'm Ed Dutton, and I'm a researcher, independent researcher and writer, and I have an internet channel called Jolly Heretic, where I discuss the kind of science that is increasingly expunged from our increasingly neo-religious universities, and I've written various books on all kinds of subjects, on evolutionary psychology, on religion, on nationalism, on various topics.
Cool. So one of the topics I've been wanting to do for a while, and I've tried to reach out to various guests on this, and I guess people are nervous or don't agree with this line of reasoning, but I mean, as a Hare Krishna, many of us don't believe in evolution. And of course, you may believe in evolution, but that's not the topic today. But often you'll hear atheists give this argument, oh, evolution is true because all the scientists agree, or at least most of them agree, so it must be true. And that reads like a religious argument. And, of course, the idea is...
It is a religious argument, yes. So the idea that I would distinguish between what I would call genuine scientists and what I would call I love scientists. So you have the I love science crowd, these people, and not normally sort of urban urban elite types that I love science, and those two things are quite separate. I think we can conceive of the priestly cycle of science or of the priestly cycle of universities, whereby science in the traditional Aristotelian sense, in the sense of genuinely wanting to make sense of the world, and thus having a questioning attitude towards everything, is produced by what we might call genius types. And those geniuses tend to be characterized by outlier high intelligence combined with moderately sort of psychopathic traits, which mean and also with very high openness, which is that you're interested in ideas and you're open to new ideas, and you're fascinated by making sense by just ideas, by possibilities. And those kinds of people generate new ideas because they question the status quo. And it's only by questioning the status quo that we can come to a more nuanced and accurate understanding of the nature of the world. But the problem is that lots of people are heavily invested in the status quo, and so therefore they become very, very upset by it, by anything that rocks the boat. And so that's why these geniuses have to have these sort of personality types. If they have outlier high intelligence, this tends to correlate with basically autistic traits. And people that are autistic are obsessed with systematizing, and thus to a certain extent with knowing the truth about the world. And they lack social skill, they lack empathy. And so this means that they either don't understand that their ideas are going to offend people, or if they are high in psychopathic or in moderately psychopathic traits, which the research indicates these geniuses are, then they don't care. And also if they're low in or slightly low in conscientiousness, which is impulse control and rule following, then they will think outside the box. They will be able to think things that for most people are literally unthinkable. And therefore they will be able to generate these fascinating new ideas that rock the boat and that make sense of the world in a new and more accurate way. And so that's the genius type. And you've got to distinguish between that type and the I love scientist, we could call them, or the head girl type. The head girl at schools. I guess you have these in New Zealand as well. We do in the UK at girls' schools, the head girl. You know what I mean? So Chris Lilly, and he has this character Jemay. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, like that. And those people are very different. They are highly intelligent, but within the normal range, which is different from being outlier high intelligent. And they are very high in agreeableness and high in conscientiousness. And so this means that they are they are highly rule following, and they don't like rocking the boat. And that kind of high intelligence is associated with taking on the current, understanding what the current dominant worldview is, coming up with ways of forcing yourself to conform to it, and then signaling your conformity to it as a means of attaining social status, basically with high status beliefs. And the scientist, the normal incrementalist scientist, as opposed to the genius type, he's very different. He has intelligence within the normal range that is high, plus high conscientiousness and relatively high agreeableness. So those people are very different. And it's those kinds of people, they are not attracted to science really because they want to understand the nature of the world. They are attracted to science to the extent that science gives you power, gives you prestige, gives you social status. And so you end up with this kind of priestly cycle of universities whereby they are established by genius types that come up with fantastic world-moving sort of stuff. They establish the universities. The universities then have a certain prestige because of their association with genius. The universities then attract the head girls or the I love science types. They put things such as power and status and whatever above the pursuit of truth, because sometimes those things conflict, because if truth can offend and offend vested interests. And they eventually change the culture of the university such that it's about promoting the current dogmas. They essentially exclude the genius types who are unable to behave themselves and unable to conform. And then the universities become completely dominated by these people. They become the means of basically propounding whatever religion has social prestige, and then the universities go into decline until they're in such decline they have to be reformed. And then it just goes all over again. So that's the fundamental difference, as I see it, between the genius and the head girl. And it's the head girl that would be I love scientists rather than the scientist.
So there's lots of directions that opens up for me, but I guess to keep it focused, the argument would be sound if it were the case that the current structure of the scientific architecture, the dogma making machine that is the scientific communities and academia, if it were actually a highly tuned machine for arriving at truth, and what you just described is some reason to doubt that that's the case, because the genius types that actually go and make these deepest discoveries, they're not rising to the top in the current system.
No, so there are periods of time when those kinds of they don't have to be in the system though. So what you have in from really the Reformation onwards is that the university changes from, if you think about the way the universities kind of started. They started off with scholasticism, and these were highly innovative by the standards of their time anyway. They were highly innovative new ways of thinking, and they were associated with the universities. The universities that attract, because they have prestige, they attract these people who are with normal range intelligence. Remember, normal range intelligence is not about being autistically focused on the truth. That's outlier high intelligence. Normal range intelligence is associated with wanting prestige and power and all that sort of thing. And so gradually the culture of the universities tips such that they are more concerned about what is of interest to these, what I call midwits, whatever you want to call them, the head girls, which is conformity, which is everyone getting along, which is not offending people, which is a means of attaining power. That is the genius stuff. The geniuses are the opposite of that. They're excluded. And by the time of the Reformation, even before the Reformation, it was happening. The university is completely taken over by the religion, and it is just a way of propounding the religion. So by the 1700, whatever, you had to be a member of the Church of England. You had to be ordained to be a don. You had to literally be a priest at Oxford or Cambridge or Durham in order to be a don, in order to be an academic at the university. And no interesting stuff really came out of the universities at all for hundreds of years. And all of the interesting stuff was from gentlemen scholars. Okay, they'd been to universities because they were often, not always, because they were members of the upper class, and it was also a kind of finishing school for the upper class. But the interesting stuff was done by gentlemen scholars, or wasn't done at Oxford and Cambridge, at the English universities. That's another thing. So the Scottish universities, for example, they were highly innovative in terms of the study of medicine, and they weren't straitjacketed by being basically means of propounding the current religion. So Edinburgh University, that was or Aberdeen, or what, these were the places to go and study medicine and things like this, not Oxford and Cambridge. They were more prestigious at the time. They were more academic than Oxford and Cambridge. Oxford and Cambridge were just finishing schools for the upper class that weren't that prestigious, a bit like these days, I don't know, going to Sandhurst or going to agricultural college or something. And so you end up with these two kinds of people, and one overtakes the other, and that has happened again. So there was a period where they reformed the universities because all the clever kids were going to places like Leiden in the Netherlands. In those days, of course, all university was in Latin, so you could go abroad and study, or the German universities or the Scottish universities. Oxford and Cambridge by the 1860s, but in total decline, and so they had to reform or die, basically. And so they did reform, and then they got rid of all the religious entrance requirements, and therefore they opened up to genius and to genius types. And so those people come back in Oxford, Cambridge, Durham, whatever. They become prestigious once again, and now, of course, we've had the collapse of the old religion, Christianity, which it was originally propounding, the rise of this new religion of multiculturalism. This is because these people are power focused and they see the universities as a source of power, a source of prestige. They, of course, want to take them over, and they're essentialists. They're Platonists. They don't understand that prestige is associated with something for various reasons. They just think it's an inherent quality within something. So Oxford University, doesn't matter Oxford University is prestigious because it's 50% of people that go there go to private schools, or used to be the case, and the nobility go there and whatever. And they don't seem to understand that if you exclude those people from it with politically correct policies, then prestige just follows them somewhere else. They don't understand that. There is, I mean, an example of this is Durham University, where I was at Durham, and that only started to become prestigious in about 1950. And the reason for that was because before then it was just a university in the north of England where northern people went because they were too poor or whatever to get to even contemplate going to Oxford or Cambridge. And from about 1950, they brought in policies to try, okay, make Oxford and Cambridge fairer, that you got in not because you'd been to public school or whatever, but because you did well. But the result of that was that lots of people from Eton and so on, whose parents had been to Oxford and Cambridge, were excluded from Oxford and Cambridge. They wanted to go somewhere like Oxford or Cambridge. So they went to Durham because it was in a nice old town and it had colleges. And then prestige passed there. Yeah, at the moment, it's increasingly a religious environment. You have to conform to certain religious dogmas based around the religion of multiculturalism, equality, all this stuff, in order to go there or in order to not get sacked from going there. And so increasingly, you're going to get people going to other universities or going to universities abroad, where like in Eastern Europe, or I'm affiliated to a university in Eastern Europe, or I'm affiliated to a university in Saudi Arabia. They don't have restrictions on what you can say about race and whatever. They have restrictions on what you can say about the Prophet Muhammad, but that doesn't really affect me. So you'll get this change, and you just get more independent scholars. So yeah, at the moment, what you would expect to happen is that universities are a bubble. People will soon understand now that you have 50% in the UK of kids going to university. It will no longer have prestige to go to university. As Oxford and Cambridge and like the really good universities become increasingly politically correct, it will no longer have prestige to go there, at least not in humanities subjects and where there aren't objective standards. In science, where it's teaching something useful, maybe. But the idea originally was, you go to Oxford and you do a degree in Latin, and what that's teaching you is thinking skills and whatever. If that's not the case, then it's useless. And what I expect is for this bubble to eventually burst. And as it did before, this happened before in the 17th century, and people to decreasingly go to university, and it will be spearheaded by the sort of upper class, by the elite, and they will stop going to university. We shouldn't forget that we don't have to go back that far. We only have to go back 200 or 300 years to find that the elite would go on. They wouldn't bother. The university, Oxford and Cambridge, that was for the sort of the lower aristocracy and the middle class. That wanted qualifications and things like that, that wanted credentialism. And the elite would go on the grand tour. That was the prestigious thing to do, to go on the grand tour of Europe, and maybe with a private tutor, and maybe spend some time at Dresden University or Groningen University or Leiden University or somewhere in France or whatever. That was the prestigious thing, the grand tour. So you could imagine something like that happening again.
Well, these days, more than ever before, someone can become highly educated just from courses they can do online or watching lectures on YouTube or listening to audiobooks or studying themselves, right? So the prestige that comes with a university degree is more meaningless than it's ever been.
Well, it's true, but then, I mean, the thing is that employers will want some sort of evidence that you've done it. They won't necessarily want to just take your word for it. So as long as these online things can, I can see it coming to a point where an employer is impressed by the fact that you have, rather than gone to university, you have got together the money somehow to, well, or not even that, that you've got a job for a few years, and then in your spare time, you have educated yourself online using various resources. There would be a prestige dimension to which ones you use, and there would be money involved and whatever, and that is more impressive than having gone to a traditional university. So yeah, you can see that this change could happen. My understanding is that it's already happening among people that go to English public schools, which is that people are increasingly leaving without a degree and going on to training schemes that are set up for non-graduates by very, very prestigious sort of financial companies and whatever, and just bypassing the degree. And
you mean a high school diploma?
Sorry?
You mean they're bypassing high school?
No, the degree, bypassing university.
So they finish high school and then they're skipping university and just getting vocational training.
Yes, they're going to high school, what we call secondary school in the UK, to public school. You know, understand what that? So like Eton, like a very prestigious boarding school. And then these people are scouting around these schools to get people to come straight into work for them, because they see the fact that they've gone to Eton or what some such places as a sign of their intelligence and their character and just being the right sort. What those people start, what the upper class starts, according to Trickle, what's his name, George Simmel's trickle effect, then sort of passes down the society. So universities started off as something that the upper class did, and then it trickles down the society to the middle class, and then to the working class, and so on. And so you would expect eventually, as university stops being prestigious, which it inherently is not prestigious. If 50% of kids go to university, university in itself is not prestigious. Right. Only the best universities are prestigious. If they become woke and not signs of being competent, then they cease to be prestigious. And so you would expect the upper class to eventually start to innovate something else, doing something else, and that could be what they're doing.
I like that point you made, that prestige follows the actual innovative people that are intelligent. So if they leave the universities, then the universities lose their prestige. Reminds me of what I've heard recently with like, you know, on TikTok, different charismatic personalities will rise to the top through people finding them entertaining, and every now and again somebody will try to make a platform, and they'll try to grow their platform in competition with something like TikTok by paying a bunch of celebrities to come on. But the problem is the celebrities have already been paid, so they're not incentivized to make good content, and also the celebrities might be famous for whatever reason, but they might not actually be entertaining in a TikTok video kind of sense. So you know, just paying someone who's well known to do something doesn't work so well. In the same way, just getting someone who has a degree and is well trained and trying to get them to do a job well doesn't necessarily work. What you need is the person who's actually intelligent enough to do the job well.
Well, indeed. I mean, that's what they've tried to do with this thing called the University of Austin. So they've argued that universities are dead. The traditional universities are woke. They're taken over by this new religion. They're a waste of time. And so let's set up these rival universities that are non-woke. The problem is, that's not quite the case, because those universities themselves have certain restrictions where they daren't go, such as race differences or whatever, because even they are ultimately trying to find a financial niche in the woke culture and not be completely destroyed. So that they're actually disingenuous in that sense. There's certain things they won't look at, and B, those they will get sort of celebrity types like Ayaan Hirsi Ali or whatever to endorse them as a means of getting publicity and looking like they know what they're talking about. And so that's why those ideas won't necessarily work. I think what I suspect we will move back to with the collapse of universities, because they're super woke and whatever. B, because universities are no longer prestigious, and they no longer, it's a pyramid scheme. You're investing money in nothing, basically. It's like investing money in tulips in 17th century Holland. I mean, you're not going to get anything for your money for a lot of degrees. It's just a waste of money. A lot of these people could spend their grandfather or father would have spent their formative years training to be something useful, like a plumber or an electrician or something like that. And these people spend their time doing a degree in gender studies, and then they go out and they find there's no job for them to do. And they end up doing rubbish work, and then they get bitter, and then they get involved in sort of left-wing politics as a virtue signal, and try and find a position for themselves at as a diversity advisor or whatever. And it creates this, because they can't get the positions they want, because there's only a limited number of academic positions. It creates then this elite over-promotion effect, whereby the elites are violently fighting each other for the small number of places. And one of the ways they do that is by questioning the morality of the other elites and trying to bring them down so they can get their jobs and all this sort of stuff. And so you just end up with this very nasty atmosphere at universities, which is not conducive to doing genuine research, fearless research. So this seems to be what's occurring, and I think that this bubble will burst eventually. And there's some evidence that that's already happening in America, that you've got the less prestigious colleges just sort of closing down. And those colleges are only really, I mean, if you're teaching 50% of the population a degree, then that's not degree standard anymore, is it? That's degree standard was degree. If you're 10% of the population doing a degree, the population hasn't become more intelligent; it's become less intelligent. We know that, and so. If you go back to our parents' generation, or my parents' generation anyway, when 10% of the population were doing a degree, then it's a highly elite thing, and you've got to be really intelligent to get a degree. Now it's 50%. The only way you could ensure that those people are all getting degrees is by reducing it to kind of the standard of high school, basically, which is what's basically. The whole thing is a bubble that will burst, and you will increasingly find, as you did in the 19th century and the 18th century, that the original stuff happens, the genuine innovative stuff happens among independent scholars who are not affiliated to universities, or at least not to Western universities. For example, Thomas Edward, the Aberdeenshire shoemaker in the 19th century, world expert on geology and on fossils and shellfish and things. And even then they try and cancel you. So I've got a colleague, Emil Kierkegaard, and he's an independent scholar, and they've just had him cancelled from going to the ISA, the International Society for Intelligence Research Conference, because some Ethiopian who objected to it. So even that they try and cut you out of, and present eventually academic journals themselves. But the problem is that sort of truth will out.
That reminds me of a quote I heard recently. I was hearing the story of a mathematician. I was trying to quickly search his name. Maybe you know, but he was not university trained himself, and then he basically just taught himself math, and he was a highly innovative mathematician. And his attitude towards university was, if it's needed, then it's of no use. So basically, if you're not intelligent enough to figure it out on your own, university can't teach it to you. I'm not saying I agree with you, but with this point, but it's just an interesting attitude. And then the converse, which is, if you don't need it, then it's also of no use, because you can just teach yourself. So like this guy taught himself all this they just gave him some math problems, and he spent a couple of years and solved all these they gave him 10 math problems or something that couldn't be solved, and after a couple of years he solved them all, or most of them.
I guess you could argue that it was needed back in the time when there was no internet and you had to have access to a physical library. That's the first thing. So it was needed in that context. And so what a lot of people used to do, I did a book, I've done various books. One book I did was a book on a collateral ancestor of mine called Sir Piers Dutton. It was called The Ruler of Cheshire. Sir Piers Dutton, Tudor Gangland, and the Violent Politics of the Palatine. And what you find if you go back to that time is that lots of people pass through Oxford or Cambridge, but they don't, or even the Inns of Court, which was where they trained barristers, but they don't actually get the qualification. And the idea is just to have access to a library and to learn interesting stuff. But they would never actually bother getting a degree. They didn't need the degree. They didn't need the qualification. They were members normally of the gentry, of the upper class. The only people that needed the qualification were those that were wanting to be vicars or perhaps lawyers. So they would need the qualification. So they would graduate and get a degree. But most other people they'd matriculate, they'd spend time at the university, but they wouldn't actually graduate. And that was very common, that they would go there, they would learn stuff, but they wouldn't actually bother graduating. And so that was the use of universities. That was the kind of the point of them, that intelligent people could go there and have access to information and learn, which was there was a premium on. I mean, think if you go back to before the rise of printing, how rare books were, and they had to be copied out meticulously by hand and all this kind of stuff in certain libraries. So that was the use of them. Someone like that person who is very good at maths had to have access to, he had to be able to learn maths, and he had to be able to learn the methods of being good at maths and all that sort of thing. So I think there is some benefit to them. But now there's all this stuff online, the most I can say is that there are some people who are good at teaching, who are good at absorbing information and presenting that information in a way that is inspiring, in a way that makes you ask questions, and in a way that makes you want to know more, and therefore helps to direct a person like that genius mathematical person, who I can imagine is quite poor impulse control and quite low agreeableness. I can help to get a person like that who could just be all over the place and not really achieve anything, and just sort of be a sort of Mensa type that spends his time doing silly card games and stuff, and inspire and direct them towards doing something useful. So that could be a potential benefit to it.
I found his name. It was Alexander Grothendieck. Obviously, I'm going to be pronouncing that wrong. He's German.
Okay.
Are you familiar with him?
No.
So yeah, coming back to So I think university is obviously helpful because if somebody's, it's a very rare genius who's going to teach themselves complex mathematics. Most people, if you teach them, then maybe they can go and solve other problems. But of course, the process of learning something yourself is how you learn, also, rather than just being spoon-fed things. I'm an electrician, and one of the ways I learned quickly was I just got thrown in the deep end and given my own jobs pretty early on. Whereas if someone's just coaching you through all the time, you don't learn it quite as well. Coming back on the point I was making earlier, so I was talking. So to steelman the argument, one way we can steelman the argument that all the scientists believe it, therefore it must be true, or the scientific consensus says, therefore you should believe it too. That would be a good argument if there was a system that ensured all the best ideas were rising to the top, and it wasn't religious, and people were just sincerely interested in truth, and whoever could defend their ideas the best, their ideas won out, and people accepted and yielded to that. It doesn't seem to be that's the case, as you've given a few examples of. But
one argument that myself and my colleague Michael Woodley have looked at is the idea that under a conditions basically of very harsh group selection, in which groups are fighting each other and killing each other, and one group dominates another, then one strategy via which you can dominate other groups and therefore ensure that your genes survive, that your extended your genetic interests, your ethnic group survive, is via coming up with the best inventions. And so coming up with the best inventions requires that you nurture genius, and requires that you let geniuses, you tolerate the antisocial side of genius, because the positive side of genius is that they come up with these brilliant sort of inventions. And so it could be argued that under that system, when we were a society that wasn't decadent, when we were a society that wanted to dominate other societies, then it is indeed it is under conditions basically of social stress that the best ideas will rise to the top. Because if the people that do not advocate the best ideas, and the groups that do not advocate the best ideas, just die out. So that's one system that we had. And if you go as recently as the 19th century, you have a child mortality rate of 10 or 20%. You have warfare over resources between different groups. And the reason why Britain, I mean, you're living in New Zealand, but New Zealand is basically Britain South. All of these places, America, parts of North America, parts of South America, New Zealand, Australia, a group within India, they're all British. And the reason for that is that Britain is basically the most genius nation the world has ever known. That for whatever reasons, in terms of evolution, it promoted this genius strategy. One strategy that you can dominate other groups with is being high in positive and negative ethnocentrism, which is a bit like what the Northeast Asians are like. But they're not very high in genius. And I've done research on this with my Japanese colleague. They're very low in openness compared to Europeans. And the Finns, by the way, where I live, are intermediate between Europeans and Northeast Asians. The Finns, even though they have the highest intelligence of any European people, they have per capita major innovation, per capita genius, on a par with places like Romania that have an IQ of 85, and the Finns have an IQ of about 103. So there's a sort of a genius strategy, and under conditions of conflict, then it is the people that will produce the best inventions and whatever, which is underpinned by having the optimum per capita number of geniuses, that will rise to the top. And it could be argued that was why we tolerated geniuses in the 19th century, because we were in this situation still of kind of group selection, or at least we thought we were. We had been inculcated with this idea that we were, and so therefore we tolerated Jesus. If you take that away, if you have a situation where basically we have really what we've created for ourselves is a kind of massive warm period, where we live in a jungle where basic needs are met, and there's just nothing to worry about at all. It's an evolutionary mismatch of the most extreme kind, and in that kind of context, we don't need to compete with other societies to have the best inventors and do the best stuff, because everything seems like it's going to basically be all right. Basic needs are met. There's nothing to worry about. And so in that context, people that are geniuses, i.e. antisocial, they're a problem. To put it on an everyday level, if you have an interview for a job at a university, who are you going to employ? Are you going to employ the head girl who is hardworking, high in conscientiousness, cooperative, pro-social, openness to a limited degree, and will come across as a great person to work with. You're going to employ her, or you're going to employ the male autistic weirdo with outlier high IQ who turns up in weird clothes and is just an absolute oddball. Who are you going to employ? Well, under traditional conditions where there were no women at the universities anyway, and in which it was kind of understood that those people would come up with possibly with amazing ideas, and there was this philosophy of a sort of neo-Thomism whereby truth was sacred and not to be questioned in any way. It was blasphemy to question the truth, and so the autistic weirdo will be obsessed with the truth, so that's good. And secondly, the autistic weirdo might come up with something, and that's the important thing. The important thing is that he comes up with something, and so he might, and that's important, and so therefore we employ the autistic weirdo. Whereas now we don't have this attitude so much, that we've lost the religious kind of attitude that truth is sacred and shouldn't be questioned. We've lost the idea that they're worth tolerating because they come up with something brilliant, because we just don't see things in that way anymore. We see things in this incrementalist way, and so you of course give the job to the girl, the head girl, and then she gradually changes the culture of the university so that it becomes more concerned with what is of interest to girls, which is not systematizing and making sense of the world. It is empathy and getting on with people and everyone feeling equally valued, and not rocking the boat and not upsetting people and being socially anxious and whatever. And so the university becomes a girls' game, and increasingly it's just pointless, and that's what's happened. Did you know that when they first let in women to Oxford University, they had this idea, let's let girls into Oxford University, and then there was this reaction against it because it was found that the traditional culture of the seminar, whereby someone presents their ideas and you rip them to bits, and in the sort of cut and thrust of an academic disputation, was a problem with these girls, because they would take it personally and they would cry and whatever. And so therefore it was argued that there should be only one girl let into every 7 males. There was a reaction against letting them in because it changed the culture of the university. It basically made it less focused on the autistic pursuit of the truth. So it's a serious problem. It changes the culture, and not just girls, but normal range intelligent men, because they are focused on power and prestige and whatever, rather than the autistic pursuit of the truth. So I think that is the so there are circumstances in which the pursuit of the truth can be very, very important. It's just that we are not in those circumstances anymore. We are in the circle where basic needs are met, and so we just become decadent, and it just seems like we don't need to bother. And remember, the flip side of it is people that are offensive and unpleasant and who rock the boat and who make life difficult.
Yeah, I really like that point. I like to think of the difference between STEM fields and humanities, because you get that sharp distinction, right? Like, if you're building bridges, you don't really care what the person's belief is, what their race is, ethnicity, gender identity. You just care if they're going to make a bridge that doesn't fall over. Or Jordan Peterson wrote it funny, right? Like there's not roving bands of sexists that are ensuring that you only hire male plumbers. You don't really care.
So
you just want someone that's going to come and fix
like
it.
English literature or theology, it doesn't matter. It's not really important. And so it doesn't have real world consequences in a direct way. And so you can afford to not employ the best.
Yeah. And bad ideas can afford to rise to the top because there's no consequences.
Whereas there are consequences to ballsing up the building of a bridge, or ballsing up the building of a public building, or whatever it happens to be. I mean, there was a case recently, it was last year or 2 years ago, of a building that collapsed in Miami Beach. This building collapsed, and they were told years earlier by an engineer called Frank Morabito, who, being an engineer, probably had an IQ of at least 130. And the problem was that I think he assumed that the people that he was dealing with, i.e. the members of the local council or whatever, were as intelligent as him, which of course they weren't. They said that you've put a swimming pool on the roof of this building. The swimming pool is leaking into the structure of the building, and if you don't do something about it, it's going to cause exponential damage until the building is destabilized or something. That's what he said. Now, obviously, an intelligent person would understand him saying exponential damage means that the building will fall down. But he didn't say it. He didn't say,
right.
get rid of the swimming pool or the building will fall down. He didn't say that. He said it in accurate way. It's causing exponential damage to the structural integrity of this building, and it needs to be rectified. I think he used words like as soon as possible or something like that. But that's not good enough for these people. They're too stupid to understand that. And the result is that the building fell down, and that becomes, and people were killed, and that becomes seriously dangerous. And this ideology of equality, this nonsense ideology of equality, if you start promoting engineers, which we are doing to some extent, on the grounds of the color of their skin or their sex or their fact that they're transsexual or whatever it happens to be. Now, we are doing this in terms of government. We are over promoting people because they're women or ethnic minorities or whatever, but not because they're the best in terms of government. And that's obviously going to have serious consequences to not promote the best. As my colleague Bruce Charlton has said, we're not even trying. It's got a book called Not Even Trying. We're not even trying to be the best in terms of these things. We're not even attempting to promote the best people. But if life has consequences, if life is serious, and that was the attitude of the Victorians, I mean, if child mortality is 10% and you're surrounded by death all the time, then life is serious. Life has consequences. Life matters. You're struggling to survive. Then, of course, you will try to promote the best people. And what they did under that previous period was before the Victorians, was they didn't promote the best people. They promoted people because they were aristocrats or whatever. And what eventually happened was that other countries like Germany started to promote the best people, started to have universities that were based around, the objective pursuit of truth and whatever, and science. And then England was falling behind. And so England had to reform to be like Germany. That's where our current university system comes from, really, from Germany. And then we were competing better. So it has, and we will see, I think, in the future, the serious consequences of not promoting the best people. And that is most obvious in terms of infrastructure and the production of infrastructure that actually works. That it's autistic weirdos, I'm afraid, that you need to do who do you want to do the electrics in your house? Do you want it to be someone that got onto the electrics course because they're a woman or because they're black or because they're disabled? Or do you want it to be a person that's really, really good at electronics? And the answer is obvious, that you want it to be a person that's really good at electronics. Because if that's not what you get, then your house could catch fire.
Yeah, so this makes me think of an analogy to diet. So some people can have a food sensitivity where the consequences of their diet might come a week late. So if they're eating a food that's not good for them, the effects accrue. And they might be eating this food all the time, so it's really difficult for them to actually notice that this is causing anything. Whereas somebody could have another food sensitivity where, like people who are celiac, where if they eat gluten, they know about it like within 2 hours or a couple of hours, and they suffer quite badly. So usually people who are celiac don't eat gluten. Of course, a couple hundred years ago, nobody knew about gluten sensitivity, so some people were just sickly. Likely there was such a thing as celiac disease back then, but we didn't know about it. So I'm comparing this to the example you gave with the buildings or with the humanities, because there are consequences for bad ideas rising to the top, even in humanities fields. But it's more of an effect that accrues. It's more delayed.
Yeah, they're more. I think that's a good point. With science, it's immediate, or it's fairly immediate. If you build a badly structured piece of civil engineering, then the consequences can be fairly quick. But it's true that with humanity,
the causal mechanism is very obvious too, whereas with humanities, it takes some intelligence to see the patterns.
Well, it takes intelligence and it takes time, and there's more variables involved.
Yeah.
But eventually you see it. Eventually you see it that the standard of people that go into politics, the intellectual standard of people that, let's say, go into politics or go into the civil service, and who are making decisions or who are running airports or who are doing whatever. All of these things are now suffering from a situation where we are not promoting the best. We are promoting people. I'm not saying that you don't get women who are brilliant and can do these jobs. I'm not saying you don't get ethnic minorities that are brilliant and can do these jobs. In fact, if they are East Asians, they'll probably do them better than white people on average. They'll be more intelligent than them. Or if they are Ashkenazi Jews. But the people are being promoted for the wrong reasons into positions of authority, and into positions of power, and then and then things just don't work as well, it kind of it can be extrapolated across society, and so you just find that gradually things don't work as well, and this is, I think, obvious in Africa when Europeans withdrew from somewhere like Zimbabwe. It was gradual that the people that were being promoted to run things or whatever were just less intelligent on average, and less had less pro-social, less general fact of personality, which is high agreeableness, high conscientiousness, low neuroticism, and gradually things don't start to work as well. But then you get some tipping points where the people notice. So, for example, everybody that I know that I've spoken to that's Zimbabwean or South African remembers the time they were first asked for a bribe. So under European rule, there was no bribery, there was no corruption. But under African rule, well, there was corruption, but not in such an overt way. Under African rule, it becomes much more in your face, and everyone remembers the time they were first asked for a bribe, by a public official or whatever it happens to be. And so you do get these turning points that people will notice. So the first time you notice a major pothole in the road, that would be a good one. You know that you're in a society in decline if you're seeing a massive pothole in the road, or a society that's on its way up. But either way, a society that's not of a high standard. And that's the kind of thing that you see increasingly. And even with something like Concorde and Concorde crashing, I think you can see that as a manifestation of this effect. I mean, that was over 20 years ago, and okay, at that time perhaps people were being given jobs on the basis purely of their ability. But the reason why Concorde, that thing that caused Concorde to crash, which was a bit of jagged metal that was the wrong shape, falling off the back of the Airbus that was ahead of Concorde onto the runway, puncturing Concorde's tire and causing Concorde to catch fire and crash. That could have happened at any point between 1969 and the year 2000. It happened because of stupidity, because of one stupid person making a stupid mistake. But if what we are in is an increasingly over-promoted society, where every generation since maybe 1800, the best minds boil off, and then the best minds become the second-rate minds and the third-rate minds and the fourth-rate minds of 1800. And at the other end of the scale, the people that are doing relatively menial jobs are considerably stupider than would have been the case a couple of generations ago. And so they make more and more little mistakes. And those little mistakes can have dramatic consequences, as we saw with Concorde. And also lots and lots of little mistakes have dramatic consequences with regard to the overall functioning of society. So a good example is somewhere like India. India, perhaps in part because of the caste system, has some people that are extremely intelligent and have very, very high IQ, and brilliant mathematicians, brilliant scientists, all this sort of thing. But it's difficult for it to achieve a smooth running society because the average IQ is 80. And so you've got lots of people, therefore half the society have an IQ which is, or about a third of the society have an IQ which is retarded by Western standards. And those people are living in the now, and they are making lots and lots of short-term stupid decisions all the time. And then when you go to India, you notice it, just litter chucked in the street, roads not fixed, electricity blackouts, lots and lots of little problems. And that's the kind of thing, if you don't promote the best. And India, by the way, I think probably does promote. Well, there's corruption in India, so I don't know. Does it promote the best? I don't know. But the West, as we decreasingly do that, then that's the kind of thing that you'll notice.
Right. Another steelman that could be offered of the scientific consensus believes it, so it must be true, is that we've gone through this whole process over centuries or decades of arriving at ideas like evolution being an absolute fact and whatever other dogmas there are, and those are all true, so you'd be stupid not to believe it. That's why they all agree.
It's a basic philosophical fallacy which is incredible that we let people get away with this. It's a basic philosophical fallacy, informal fallacy, called appeal to authority, or appeal to the majority, or whatever, appeal to prestige even. That is just no argument. And when they were saying during the corona pandemic, follow the science, or no, that is the most anti-scientific thing you could possibly say. the paradox of follow the science was lost on very few proper scientists. You don't follow the science, never. You, as a scientist, you have a genuinely questioning and skeptical attitude towards everything, and that includes towards evolution, and that includes towards even the idea that the world is monist, rather than dualist, or that there's no spiritual universe, or whatever it happens to be. You have a questioning attitude towards everything, and you look into it. But as I say, you've got to distinguish between the genuine scientists who are like that, the scientists in the spirit of Aristotle and Darwin and whatever, and the ones who are the midwits, the head girls, who are in it for the prestige. And what those people do is they will believe something because it is prestigious, and then they will, which includes believing in evolution as opposed to not believing in evolution, and then they will sort of signal, they will try to outcompete other people in signaling the degree to which they are they believe these things, and so on. And I think there's a certain personality type. One thing that's been found is that being left wing correlates with neuroticism, with being mentally unstable. But so neuroticism is that you feel negative feelings strongly and whatever. So how do you deal with that? Well, one way that you can deal with that is by basically telling yourself that you are brilliant and you are fantastic and whatever, that you are great, that you are. That's the sort of vulnerable narcissist type. So telling yourself that you are great. How can you do that? Well, if you adopt high status beliefs, and then you can tell yourself that you are superior to these idiots that don't have high status beliefs, and you can hope to achieve even further status because you're insecure and you want status and you have low self-esteem and you have a need for status. You're narcissistic and you're Machiavellian. So you adopt high status beliefs, and you adopt beliefs that are believed to be highly moral by those that have positions of power in the society, and then you stress that that's the case, such that you can feel that you can suppress your feelings of angst about yourself and your own worth by saying, "Oh, well, I'm morally superior to everybody else. I'm intellectually superior to everybody else. I'm more prestigious and important than everybody else because I'm attached to these highly prestigious, highly moral sort of beliefs." And then the problem is that when people on a certain, you don't feel it, you don't feel this, but you're telling yourself that it's the case. And then if people question it, then what? And on a certain level that you're not quite sure. On a certain level you're not quite sure that you're right. And if people show you this, then the problem with that is that what they are showing you really is that you are fake. They are reminding you that you are fake, and you are doing that as a means of coping with your own insecurities. And so they can react in a very ferocious way to those kinds of people that question, the status quo, that question the current high status beliefs, because those people are causing cognitive dissonance and are making them get in touch with what they really are, which is basically people who have a very fragile sense of self and think they're not very important. And I think that you find that a lot with the I Love Science crowd. But someone like you as a Hare Krishna will not trigger a person who is just a scientist who accepts evolutionary theory for various logical reasons. You won't trigger someone like that. Someone like that will turn around and say, "Well, look, here's the evidence for evolution," and they'll have a discussion. They'll be prepared to have a discussion with you about it. And as long as you don't come across as some unreasonable nutcase who's like the I Love Scientist, but the other extreme, the I Love religionist, then fine. But someone like the I Love Scientist will just get very, very triggered and upset by what you're saying and just tell you you're an idiot and shut up because you believe in some kind of weird. They'll probably use emotive terms as well to make you go away.
Yeah.
So they'll say, "Oh, it's a cult. It's a cult." My only experience of Hare Krishna, well, two experiences of it. One is that I was at the Traditional Britain Group conference, which is a conservative group in the UK some years ago, and I met this girl that was half Indian and half English, and she was Hare Krishna. And then my other experience was that when I was in India, I quite liked the Hare Krishnas because they'd let you take photographs inside their temples, whereas the Hindus wouldn't. The normal Hindus, the mainstream Hindu, wouldn't let you take photographs inside their temples, but the Hare Krishnas were like, "Yeah, fine, take a photo." and they give you food.
Yeah, they call it the kitchen religion.
Kitchen religion, yeah, it's quite good. I mean, it's quite a good method. I mean, my original degree was in theology, and my doctorate was in religious studies, and so I was quite interested in brainwashing processes. And one of the ways that you can, of course, engage in inculcating people with a religion is to cause them to associate it with something pleasant. So some religions, I mean, there was a group called the Family that used what they call flirty fishing, which is that you basically send out sexy girls, and sexy girls will evangelize. And the Mormons do this. The Mormons send out sexy young girls to evangelize, so that you kind of make that association. The Christians in the early church were very good at this. A lot of the conversion was secondary conversion. So a bloke fancies a Christian girl, so he becomes a Christian, so he can get in her pants. You know, it's a very well, I don't know if they wore pants in those days, but you know what I mean. So he can get a skirt up. And with Hare Krishna, yeah, food. The Sikhs do this as well. Giving away food is a very good way of. It's a carnal thing, you know. It's a very basic thing of making people have positive associations between with religion.
The fastest way to a man's heart is through his stomach.
Yeah.
That's
the only downside is that you Hare Krishnas insist on that it's vegetarian food. Although when I was in I'm a meat eater. I like eating meat, but I don't. When I was in a place in India called Pushkar, which is this holy, you know where I mean? This
no.
holy, it's the second holiest city in India after Varanasi. And it's you're not allowed to have meat in Pushkar. It's a vegetarian only city. And so I was there for a few days, and I had only vegetarian food. It was actually rather nice.
Yeah, I mean, I joined when I was 21, and I didn't miss meat at all. The Hare Krishna food was so good.
Why did you join?
Well, I believed in God my whole life. I was a Christian till I was 16, and then I kind of got philosophically. I had questions that Christianity couldn't really answer, and then when I was 21, I met the Hare Krishnas. They had satisfying answers. I had a few friends that were joining. Philosophy made complete sense to me.
What was satisfying about the answers? That wasn't satisfying with regard to Christianity.
I can't remember exactly what it was when I was 16, but to give a few examples from now, like, you know, Christians, I mean, I'm giving a caricature here, so the Christians that hear this might get upset, but, you know, they have this idea that something to the effect of the good news of Christianity is that Jesus has sacrificed himself to save you from what he was going to do to you if he didn't get his blood sacrifice. You know, atonement theories. Of course, that's a caricature, but it gives an extreme version of it. Whereas the Hare Krishna idea of salvation is you elevate your consciousness to the point where you would be happy in the spiritual world. You develop pure love of God, and then once you're of that quality of consciousness, then you go to the place where other people are of that quality of consciousness. So basically, you find yourself in a place surrounded by people of similar consciousness. And if you want to go to heaven, you need to elevate your consciousness, and that just makes far more sense to me.
Yeah, but it's basically they're basically both saying that there's some sort of dogma that you have to accept, and some sort of gnosis. And if you have that gnosis, whether it's genuinely believing in the atonement thing, or genuinely believing in then you're special and you're saved. I mean, in a way, they're saying the same kind of thing, aren't they?
There are a lot of similarities. Yeah, one way I will explain to people what Hare Krishnas believe is to say it's kind of like Christianity in the sense that we believe the purpose of life is to develop pure love of God and attain to a spiritual destination. There's many differences.
I mean that there have to be people for you to be a person that has the consciousness and has the gnosis. Presumably there are people that don't, and so there's something about you which is elevated above the herd.
Yeah. So the word Shraddha. The word Shraddha is translated as faith, but really it means like where you place your heart. So levels of advancement are measured by how much you're placing your heart in devotion to God. Another way of understanding it is what you're attracted to. So in a low state of consciousness, you'll be chasing hedonistic pleasures, and we can all see how that can be problematic. And in an elevated state, you're trying to please God. You're trying to please God devotees. It's a service mood, like a loving devotion.
But why do you feel that you need to have that you need to bother with this? Why do you feel that you need to have this structure in your life? Why can't you just get on with it and not think about these things like most people?
The first Hare Krishna class I heard was actually talking about, like, I had this idea of soulmates, you find the right person, marry that person, and things will be good. And the first class was about how that's not the case. He gave various examples of people, thinking they found the love of their life and then things didn't go as planned, let's say. And then he talked about how actually we can get full satisfaction in a relationship with God. And that can also,
But listen, had you had a breakup or something around the time that you became a Hare Krishna?
No, I hadn't. I was actually single mostly growing up.
All right. What kind of Christianity was it that you were before you became a Hare Krishna?
Watered down Anglican.
Watered down Anglican. Okay. So what, like, so Christmas Christian sort of thing?
I mean, I don't remember much about it. I was 16 when I left, but my mum told me that the Anglican church, where I was in Canada at the time in Vancouver, was trying to, please the liberal modern agenda, and so they were watering down the teachings a fair bit.
Oh, well, that's certainly true. Yeah, that's true. But one of the things that's interesting about people that are, we've got good data on this. I look at this in my new book, "The Past is a Future Country: The Coming Conservative Demographic Revolution," is that people who are religious are higher in agreeableness, they are higher in conscientiousness, they are lower in mental instability than people who are not religious. So there is something adaptive about being religious, and one of any kind. Doesn't matter what religion.
Is that causal, or does it filter for those people?
It's interesting that it might be causal, but there is some evidence that, for example, people who regularly attend church and whatever are lower in certain genes which have been found to be associated with depression. So it probably is partly causal because you're being in a social group and you're bonding and all this. So there's probably a causal element to it. But I think it's also symbiotic. I think that basically the norm under Darwinian conditions is to be religious. We've been selected to be religious, and therefore other things which are the norm under Darwinian conditions, like being mentally healthy and physically healthy, and what it just have ended up being pleiotripically bundled together with being religious. So it's in that sense, it's not causal.
When you say genes, is that something? It's not like epigenetics. You know how genes can be turned on and off when trauma happens.
Well, epigenetics would be the expression of the gene in the environment.
The gene would be a deterministic.
So you could have a propensity to have bad mental health, and then being involved in a church would lower that propensity because of it's this sort of natural evolutionary match to be in a bounded community and whatever. But then just the pure genetic would be that the heritability, the genetic component of how religious you are is about well, it depends on what measure of religion you use, but it's about 0.5. And with some measures, like whether you've had a conversion experience, it's about 0.7 genetic or heritable. About 0.7 heritable, 0.66 genetic. And so this implies it's very strongly genetic, and it's bound up with other genetically useful things, because that's what we were selecting for. So you would end up with basically what I think we're bringing about is a remnant normal pre-industrial population. And those people have babies, they have lots of children. And there's been an explosion of sort of mutants since the Industrial Revolution. And now it's got to a point where those people, they are no longer being pushed along an evolutionary adaptive roadmap of life, because we've become individualistic now and, if anything, anti-natalist. And so therefore they stop having children. And so the only people that want to have children are those that are genetically very strongly inclined to have children. And those are religious people. And conservatives. And those things are bound up. And so the suggestion of my research is that over the coming years, society will tip back towards being more conservative, not least because if you look at those that have very high IQ, the main fertilizer is being religious, and the main sterilizer is not being religious, is being liberal. And so you would expect this polarization, this conflict to happen among the elite, which could already be happening, and then a sort of movement backwards.
Right. What do you think about this argument that I've heard someone make, that people tend to be atheistic more when they live in a man-made environment, whereas when people live like farming, and they're really depending on the rain and the sun and all this sort of thing in a more traditional way, where the weather really affects them, more natural environment, they tend more to be religious. So you can see that you could probably chart a relationship.
It's an interesting question. So, on the one hand, intelligence is negatively associated with religiousness, and people traditionally who have high IQ are going to migrate away from the countryside, so towards the cities, because they're going to have qualifications and things and do city jobs. So you would expect people in the countryside to be more religious just because they live in the countryside, because the cleverer people who are going to be more inclined to not be religious are going to just get out.
That leaves it open that it could be either one being the causal factor.
Well, that's what I'm saying. So, well, no, I don't know how it could be either one. That's the first possibility. The second possibility is that being neurotic is associated with atheism. So if you're highly mentally unstable, then you are more atheistic. Possibly because atheism is maladaptive, neuroticism is maladaptive, and the two things just sort of go together. Because then there's this weird thing whereby if you're highly anxious, which is basically neuroticism, then often you will become religious by virtue of being anxious. It's a coping mechanism of dealing with anxiety and whatever that you become religious. So I've read some research that indicates that living in the countryside causally makes you less neurotic. In turn, because it's like an evolutionary match, and so that could perhaps causally make you more religious. But I'm not sure about that, because on the other hand, certain kinds of religiosity, what William James calls the religion of the sick soul, are elevated among people that are highly socially anxious. So I'm not sure about that. A third possibility is that if you move to the cities, then the cities you'll be more likely to just be inculcated with atheism and modern ideologies, and you'll meet other people like that, and so you'll lose your faith. Whereas in the countryside, you won't meet other people like that, and so you won't lose your faith, your religiosity.
Right. The way I think the data of intelligent people leaving the countryside could be consistent with the countryside being more conducive to religiousness is those intelligent people, had they stayed in the countryside, may have stayed more religious too. I mean, you gave a few other reasons, but obviously we'd need a much more robust data to actually parse out what the more accurate conclusion is.
Well, yeah, I could only speculate on it, but one thing that is well known is that people that live in the countryside are more conservative and more religious, and that would be consistent with the fact that people that are more conservative and thus more religious do not move about, and they stay in the countryside. They stay in the little village where they were born, and conscientiousness is associated with religiosity as well, and so that's like rule following and not liking change. And openness is negatively associated with religiosity. And so those kinds of factors will mean that the people that are more religious will stay in the countryside.
It'd be interesting to have you on for a discussion with a Hare Krishna academic, Dr. Howard Resnick, who I heard make that argument. You could discuss theology with him too. It sounds like you've put a bit of thought into it. Coming back to the epistemology and science one, the Discovery Institute put out an article a couple of years ago titled Intelligent Design is the Canary in the Coal Mine for Cancel Culture. What do you think about that idea?
What does it mean?
So the canary in the coal mine, obvious analogy of before cancel culture got really bad, we had this example of the canary in the coal mine dying of cancel culture going after intelligent design. So if somebody in an academic institution came out and said, I don't believe in evolution, here's some arguments for intelligent design, sometimes they would lose their job, sometimes they couldn't get a new job. They'd try to publish papers, it would become a lot more difficult for them to publish papers. So there was a kind of cancel culture going on. And obviously, I mean, when I've looked at these people arguments, I think they're putting forward scientific arguments in the way
there was a case, I forget what the academic journal was. It was quite a prestigious academic journal, I think, of an Iranian female academic who published a paper arguing for evidence of intelligent design, and it got through peer review and it was published. And then there was this woke campaign against it and they withdrew the paper.
Right. Yeah.
So, which ironically, of course, means that a lot more people know about it and read the paper.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't have read it if I hadn't
Well,
read
yeah.
on this stupid, mocking, smug website called which highlights papers that have been withdrawn, called Retraction Watch, and so that and so because of that, I which is a left wing website, I discovered this, but yeah, I mean, the thing is, it's their small fry there. I mean, okay, you have I think they associate. The problem is that they in the leftist mind, intelligent design is associated with people that are right wing and conservative, and they don't like people that are right wing and conservative. It's not intelligent design in itself that they give a damn about. They don't care about that really. That's not the point. The point is that they associate intelligent design with basically groups of American white people, and so they don't like it. So it's not the thing in itself that's a problem. I mean, you could go around saying that you don't believe in evolution and you believe in intelligent design. You're not going to get mega cancelled. It's because it's a way for these people to signal their extreme commitment to policing what is and isn't acceptable thought, by taking on people that are really really easy to take on. They have no real power. And taking them down. In this case, ironically, taking down an Iranian woman of all people. But there you go. That doesn't matter. It's okay to take down an Iranian woman when that Iranian woman is not ideologically sound, and has prestige attached to something which might help people that you don't like. It's all very, very complicated. I don't know about it being the canary in the I don't. I think that website is overestimating how important intelligent design is in the general debate of things. I don't think it really matters. I mean, another thing they do, that website itself, they've had a go at me on that website, right. and they've said that, oh, eugenics or whatever. So that they are themselves part of the cancel culture in a way.
Right, yeah, well, that's not something I'd support. I mean, I think scientific arguments should be met with scientific arguments, and I think these people put forward scientific arguments. Maybe not all of them all the time. I'm sure you can find examples of them.
They put forward no, I think that they are as bad as the people they condemn. They put forth scientific arguments, yeah, with regard to intelligent design, but then with regard to other things like abortion or eugenics or race or whatever, then they use the same tactics as the cancel culture of the woke left. So I think that one of the things that you often find, I personally have found a lot in my own research, okay, people associate me with like the far right, but that's because it is inherently far right now, to look into race differences or to look into intelligence differences or whatever, and so you end up associating with people who are politically far right, because you cross over on those points. But some of those people on the political far right are just as bad as those they condemn. It's just the dogmas are different. So, for example, with some people on the political far right, it's like a doctrine of faith, like like the Trinity, or that all people are equal, to say that the Holocaust didn't happen, or that, oh, there were only 100,000 people that were killed and they all died of like Qatar or something. And the evidence is not with them on that. The evidence is that we're talking millions. But that's a dogma. We can debate how many million, but we're talking millions, maybe 4 million or more. Maybe 6 million is the canonical estimate, but whatever, millions. And so it's they are as bad, but it's just that the dogmas are different.
But like, even with that extreme example of Holocaust denial, if they're so wrong, then all you need to do is simply point to the facts, which establish.
Well, yeah, exactly. But the point is that on a certain level, their critics know that they've got a point, in so much as this inviolate number, 6 million. Can we be 100% sure it was 6 million? Could it be a little bit less? But no.
Oh, if you're in the millions,
are there questions that exist over this dogma? Yes, and so the reaction is the same as the reaction with people questioning race or whatever, which is that it induces a sort of narcissistic fragility, confronts you with cognitive dissonance, and so you have to utterly condemn them. And so there can be no rational debate over this issue, and there should be a rational debate over this issue in science. There can't be.
Makes me think of an analogy for that, which is, say I was, going after somebody with debt collection in a big legal suit, saying this person owes me $10 million, and I had a whole legal case, And the rebuttal was, no, it's not 10 million, it's 9 million. It's like, okay, fine, pay me $9 million, but like, it's still a lot of money, right?
Yeah. So that is, but that's not their reaction. Their reaction is, no, it's got to be $10 million, and if it's not $10 million, then you should be executed.
Yeah, but that's how you lose arguments. It's like, okay, maybe I was wrong. Like, it could be the case that I think the person owes me 10 million, but actually it's 9 million. Maybe I made an accounting error. If that's the case, show me the data. Let's look at it, and then pay me the $9 million. Let's settle this, right?
Yeah, I think that's a very good analogy. So it's this is you do get this on both sides. It's not something that's unique to the left. But it's just that the moment, for various reasons, the left have managed to attain intense level of cultural power, and so it's more important what they're like. If you go back a couple of hundred years, it was the right and the religion and the conservatives that were in cultural power, and so it was more relevant what they were like.
But if we can just park the people who represent the ideas and just look at the ideas and say, so arguments for a certain kind of intelligent design have met with a lot of stonewalling in universities and in publishing, and that's a kind of cancel culture, and that's perhaps an early, I mean, yeah, you can say intelligent design isn't important, but what is important is the truth-making process that goes on in universities and in academic institutions. And if that comes undone, even in an area considered to be unimportant like intelligent design, we could call that a canary in the coal mine.
Okay, that's true. That's a good point. Yes, that's true. It should be no holds barred. If people want to write articles in academic journals arguing that the Earth is flat, then they should be able to do that.
Yeah,
and they should be subjected to the normal standards of peer review, based on evidence and logical arguments. And if they get through and they are published, they get through and they are published. They shouldn't be retrospectively withdrawn because of the new thing they use, a failure of peer review. There's no such thing as a failure of peer review. The argument is that you submit your stuff to peer review. Peer review is biased. The editor can manipulate the peer review. The peer reviewers can be unfair and illogical, but you play the game, and the idea is if you get through it and if with the kind of research I do, it has to be really, really good to be published, because of course you get these ideological editors. It will be stuff on race or whatever is held to higher standards than pretty much anything else. So it's if you get it through, then it's probably pretty good. But then they get very upset because of course then it becomes, they don't think in terms of truth for these people. There's no such thing as truth. They're not interested in truth. They're interested in power and prestige. Right. And that's the point, that if you have your article that disagrees with them published in an academic journal that's prestigious, then it has power and prestige, and so therefore it has to be stopped. You can't, they don't care about truth. Machiavellians, narcissists and whatever, which is what the left are, or psychopaths, which is what the right are, they're not that concerned on average, I mean, about truth. It's only the high IQ autistic that is obsessively concerned about truth. All people that aren't autistic are basically liars. That's my summary.
The autistic pursuit of truth is a nice way of putting it. I heard this example from a psychologist who was giving an example of an autistic kid having an argument with the teacher about, like, he got obsessed with like ports, and like Russia only has one port that at a certain time of the year can take deep boats or something. And he was saying the teacher's wrong about it. And he was arguing vehemently with the teacher. And then later on, he worked out he was wrong and the teacher was correct. And the autistic truth-seeking thing to do was just to immediately be like, oh, okay, I was wrong, and move on. No hard feelings, nothing, no hurt ego. Whereas a neurotypical person, if they defended an idea that was wrong, it would be really hard for them to come down off their high horse.
Yeah, because it makes them as a person seem less that they have been wrong. Whereas they are concerned about their image, they are concerned about what others think of them, they are concerned about what they think of themselves. Whereas the autistic has a sort of a weak sense of self in a way, and he doesn't really care about. He's just not concerned about. He's concerned about whether or not it's something that's true. So yeah, I think that's a very good point.
It would follow from the canary in the coal mine case about intelligent design that had there been more people standing up saying, no, we need to meet these people with scientific arguments, not with cancel culture, then maybe cancel culture wouldn't have gotten a footing.
No, I don't. If that's what they're trying to say, I don't think that. I don't think that's the case.
That's the point I'm suggesting.
I think he overestimates the importance of intelligent design. I mean, before they were having a go at intelligent design, they were having a go at a number of other things that were considered wacky or out there or whatever. So no, I don't think that's the case. I mean, the intelligent design debate was going on about 15 years ago. We had the spaghetti monsterism and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's that's significant. I mean, you already had a proto-council culture with regard to race in the 90s, 80s, 70s.
Sure.
So it was just less severe. But you already had E.O. Wilson having a bucket of ice water thrown over him at a meeting in the 70s, and J. Philippe Rushton in the late 80s and early 90s, and all this. So it's just that it's ratcheted up, such that someone like that would be immediately fired now and wouldn't be able to continue.
One thing, I guess you were touching on this too, that an interesting point about cancel culture is like these people that want to take an idea like race differences or whatever and say anyone who says that there's any genetic differences between races is extreme or bigoted in some way. The question for them is, what doesn't matter? Is it true, and does it matter if it's true? Because I would think it matters greatly whether or not an idea someone is putting forward or defending as true is in fact true, in regard to the question of whether that person is bigoted.
So what's your point? I don't understand.
Oh well, I mean, people would just say this idea is bigoted or evil or whatever label they want to give it, and it's like, but if it's true, is that still the case?
Yes,
and that would seem to me to be the important.
It is. That's the thing. That's the brilliance of this concept of hate speech. What hate speech is something that's empirically true, or at least might be empirically true, which you don't like the sound of. If it's not hate speech to say that all black people have satsumas as toes. That's not hate speech, because it's ridiculous and it couldn't possibly be true. What they don't like is if it is empirically true. So that's what hate speech is, something that is empirically true which goes against your dogmas. That's what hate speech is.
And that
or that might be, or that could conceivably be empirically true. That somebody might think, well, that could be empirically true.
Then an important point to make with regard to that comes from the work of Jonathan Haidt and cognitive behavioral therapy, that this whole idea of hate speech and trigger culture is precisely the opposite of the way you train your mind if you want to be intellectually robust and stable, mentally stable. Because, you know, like when people have a phobia of something or PTSD, the therapies always involve exposure.
And you get over it.
Yeah.
Whereas what these people are like, it's like alcoholics that just turn around and say, "Oh, alcohol's evil. You can't have anything to do with alcohol ever again." Or people, I'm phobic of seagulls, so I must keep away from them. So I think you're quite right. It's the attitude of purity. They want a world where they people that believe in hate speech, they are neurotic, they are mentally unstable, they see the world as very dangerous, and they want to use it as a means of making people not say things which make them feel insecure and make them feel bad for whatever reason it happens to be. So they want to shut them up. These words like racist or hate speech, they are bludgeon words. They're like witch or papist or something, or cult, which are a way of shutting people up and intimidating people who might question the current status quo into shutting up, to reprove them onto the path of perceived orthodoxy, which doesn't upset their feelings and make them feel bad. It's about neurotic, frightened people controlling other people and also getting power. And people that are neurotic are going to want power because they see the world as dangerous, and so they're going to want to control it. And we let this minority of nutcases who in days of old would be suppressed or would be raised in a more adaptive way so they could cope better with reality and wouldn't have to resort to this, and we've let them take over in a very short period of time. The mentally unstable neurotic girl at school who's anorexic and cuts herself because she's sad has taken over entire nations, including being the prime minister of your country. And up to and including being the Prime Minister of New Zealand. This woman, is documented that she's very mentally unstable. It's been suggested she spent time in psychiatric institutions, and she's running New Zealand. And that's how quickly this has happened, because we're so laid back and decadent, and we're so concerned with individual feelings rather than whatever, and we've done nothing about it. And she was able to shut down your entire country for 2 years based on her own neurosis. So it's very serious.
And then when the data comes out about the effects of all the lockdowns and everything, all the other measures, they just quietly don't talk about it and move on.
Yeah, precisely. And she was wrong, and she's crazy, and she really is crazy, and she's by any reasonable standard, and she's the prime minister of your country. I mean, it's really serious.
This comes to one of the failures of government centralization. Like, there's one example I heard of, like, there's a railway that was being built in America by the government. They ran out of money. They couldn't actually finish building it. So a private business took over, completed it in a fraction of the budget that the government allowed, and made it profitable, because any penny he pays comes off of his bottom dollar, whereas the government, if they don't spend all their budget, they don't get the same budget next year, so they just throw all the money away. It's like what we were talking about earlier.
In academia as well, the thing now is not about, you don't get a job because you produce good research or whatever. You get a job because you are able to get money, and you're able to get money if you play the ideological game. And so, if you apply for funding to do research into the squirrels of Ockham in Surrey, you don't get your money. But if you say the squirrels of Ockham in Surrey with reference to global warming, then you get your money. And so you have to play the ideological game. And so listen, I'm going to have to wrap up now, because I promised to take my kids to Laser Quest.
Oh, okay, right. There was just one last question I was going to ask, which is one egregious example of the new religion that we keep referencing, of the truth making of universities coming undone. So in case anyone is like, it's not religious, just an uncontroversial, egregious example.
Of what, sorry?
Of modern universities pushing a religious idea of the epistemology coming undone, and it being a religion rather than...
Well, that you have to, Noah Carl was fired from Cambridge University for doing research in which he stated that it might be philosophically acceptable to look into the existence of race differences, and going to a conference where there were other people that looked at race differences published in scientific journals, and he was fired for that.
Right. Because, I mean...
So that's...
Evidence-based compassion would be, if we can find out race differences, then we can figure out their strengths and weaknesses, get them into jobs.
He was saying what he was sacked for, in part, was saying if you say there's race differences, that's bad. He was saying if you suppress race differences, it could have the following negative consequence.
Yeah, exactly. And we care about these people.
And that was published in a serious, high-standard, peer-reviewed journal. And in part for saying that, he was fired by Cambridge University. So that's an example of the insanity of it.
Okay, cool. We can wrap up there. Thank you very much for coming on.
Well, thank you very much. It's been jolly interesting. Cool. Okay, bye-bye.